Okay. So what we're looking at here is we are connected to our data center in downtown Boston. So not very far away, but we're connected to my lab that we've built out. So my lab's not very big, but I think it'll give you, I guess, a good idea of what the overall solution looks like. We're looking at the dashboard. So in the dashboard, some information that we're providing. We do keep track and we'll alert on the status of the Amazon infrastructure. So we can get that from the EC2 status tabs there. We show you how much you're protecting today, what percentage of all your data that you're protecting. And everything that we do within our solution, as far as management, is through our protection groups, our virtual machine groups. This really came about, we did a lot of, over a year ago, we've been testing with numerous partners and customers, and we really wanted to simplify the management. And the result of that was really managing through these protection groups. It allows us to protect things, protect VMs with similar SLA very easily, or as we talked about already before, multi-tier applications that need that consistency and different things associated with them. So I'm going to go ahead and select the virtual machine group. So in my lab, I have 3 different tiers of groups set up. I have my tier 1 group that I'm protecting every 4 hours. I have my tier 2 group I'm protecting, I believe, every 8 hours. And I have my tier 3 group with my lower applications that I'm protecting once a day. Again, these are all configurable. And if I was to come in here, I could create a new group, and it really is as simple as coming in here and sliding the bars and choosing what your SLA is for those VMs. Now, offset is interesting. If you think about it, you can have multiple groups, multiple protection levels. If you want to offset when those protections starts, to ease up bandwidth in your environment at different times of the day and so forth, you have that ability as well.
How low does the RPO schedule go?
So the RPO schedule will go down to 1 hour today. We believe there are things that we can do that we can get it down, probably down to 30 minutes or so at some point, but initially we're looking at 1 hour. All right, I'll click that. So very easy to create a group, apply a policy to it. Once you have that, and I'll just go into one of my groups here, then all you do is go in and assign your VMs to the different groups. So we allow you to filter on the different VMs in there. These are all Dan, these are all my VMs now, and I can just select those and add them to the group. Once I add that VM to the group, protections will be scheduled. Right, they'll be scheduled according to the schedule that we defined for that group. Now, if you wanted to protect it immediately, we allow that. You can protect it now and go off and kick off that first protection. Then it will go on its regular schedule.
Can you add other structures instead of manually selecting, 1,000 VMs? Can I select folders? Can I select, things that come through as tenants for my vCloud automation center deployment?
Yep, so I'm going to let Suresh address that.
So we have had those asks from customers as well in terms of resource groups and folders and such. So that's something we're evaluating for a GA product.
Okay.
Yep.
How about some sort of an API for this? So if we deploy a new virtual machine through some sort of automated deployment, would we be able to then tie into this and say, now protect it?
So we have an entire REST API, which is really our UI is a reference implementation on top of that. We haven't made that public yet, but that's definitely something we want to do long term.
Yep. That's good because that's native. That'll be native. The vRealize orchestrator's got REST plugins and things like that. So that's cool. Yeah.
We decided this is something that we wanted to do from the ground up because you want higher order functions, like Dan says, but in a native API. So everything here is driven off our API.
Very cool.
Yep. Is your UI HTML5? There's just questions on Twitter about iPad.
It's all HTML5.
Yes. Yep. Okay, great. So once inside the group here, we've been protecting. I think these VMs I've had protected for a week and a half or so. It's being protected every 4 hours. I can get additional information here. So I'll show you two quick things here. If I select over on the side here, and let me just scroll down, you would actually get a historical view of the protections and how much data that we're sending across to AWS. So you'll see in this case here, it's the last 10 protections that I've done for this VM. And then if I select the VM itself, now we're going to get a bunch more details around this. You're going to find information about the OS and the different things there, the data stores, but then you're going to also get, how does this map? How does this map over to AWS, right? Because you got, AWS, Zen environment, there's different instance types. We need to be able to map that over. So we do that mapping, but we even go one step further. We allow you to configure what percentage do you want to run when you're running in AWS. So if I'm over provisioned in my primary data center, if I fail over, I might not need to run with that same size over there, because we all know that running the level of instance you're running is more cost, higher it goes, the more cost associated. So you can run at 50%, 80%, whatever you feel is sufficient for that application. Do you want to say something, Suresh?
Yeah. One thing I'd mention is that, so one of the things we want to simplify is that, number one, we are native in AWS, right? So we're not going through any nested hypervisor or anything else like that. We're running native. So what we go through is take your compute, analyze it, and then figure out how to best match it with formulas to Amazon instances when we run them native there, right? So that's a huge part of it. And like Dan mentioned, we look at the failover plan. When you have a test failover versus a production failover, you may want to run something with a smaller SLA, therefore lesser cost when you're doing tests more often. And if you actually do a production failover, you want to run it almost like a primary app, right? So we do all that, automatically in the back end, and it's, again, we have a bunch of smart defaults that you can tune later on.
Great. All right, so let's.
Possible to do automatic failover, like what if something goes wrong on my primary.
So it's always a great question. I think this has been a question people have been asking for years and years and years. Can I really do an automatic DR failover? And everything comes back that someone ultimately has to make that decision, because it could be the monitoring tool that failed. It could be something else. And ultimately someone actually has to say, go. But go ahead.
But the one thing I'd add is we have had asks about test failover, right, as being an automatic process that you can do once a quarter, once every month, something like that, and that is definitely on the table, right? So these are all things that we have thought about in quite a bit of detail, and something like that is a feature that people have requested. So we know about that.
Just to clarify one thing, you were saying that you can adjust the size of the machine as it fails over to AWS.
Yep.
You do two different sizes, one for the test and one for the live?
Yes, exactly. So what we call a mapping factor. And if it's a test failover, we right now set it at 50%. And based on that, we go through calculations of the CPU, of the virtual CPU on-premise with memory allocation, storage space usage, network I/O, and then we formulate what that maps to in an Amazon instance type. As you know, Amazon has and is continuing to add like hundreds and hundreds of different instance types based on the type of application SLU you need. And so we're kind of, automating all of that. And we keep track of all of Amazon's cost structures as they change, right? So as they drop prices and all of that, the product reflects all of that as well in the product.
So when you do a test failover, are you just testing to see if the VMs come up, or are you actually testing also to see if like the applications come up? So like if I have SQL and then a middleware tier.
So we do not consider test failure or actual failure as any different.
Okay.
I mean, the expectation for us is that whether you're doing a test or an actual real life failover, you need to have the confidence that that application is going to be running. So in terms of our product itself, we haven't really looked at, when we are building the product, we really looked at it as failover is failover, and it has two separate, prongs. One is test, and one's the actual production failover. But from the what's actually coming up, it's the application that's important. That's what people care about. So that's what we focus on.
So, but like if you're talking about doing automated failovers in the future, are you actually looking to say, okay, this server has SQL running on it, so when we do our automated test, yes, SQL came up appropriately, then, okay, this next one needed to come up, so the middleware tier came up, and so on.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things that we're learning from customers is that even within the customer's environment, the IT manager does not necessarily have ownership of the application, right? So in the first version of the product that we have, we don't have that kind of deep level of integration yet, but we clearly see that that's a place that we want to go as well, because it's really around the governance of the application, right? So this is all your own environment. This is the customer's own environment, right? And so we as OneCloud software, we don't ask for credentials for your Windows domain server or things like that. That's up to you to control.
Yeah. So in the meantime, when working with them, we suggest that when we're in a test fail scenario, connect to your your applications, run your applications. That's what it's there for, right? Okay, so just moving through here to manage. As I said, you manage within the virtual machine group. So just like we kicked off the protections, this is where you come here and kick off a failover. We do have the two different types. So we do want to know if it's a test or if it's a production. If it's a test, we're not going to protect that data when it's running up in AWS. We're going to continue to protect it on the primary data center. Otherwise, obviously, we're going to enable all those other features that we have up in AWS. And then obviously the same is true for the failback, right? So once you're up and running in a fail over scenario, you initiate the failback to the primary data center.
So as you're doing a test failover, it's still protecting the data at the primary data
Yes,
center.
it is.
Absolutely.
And there's no sort of outage for the...
No.
Okay.
So our expectation always is you're always protecting at anywhere that you're running, always.
Yep.
And are you automating the shutdown process when you do a real failover, the shutdown of your current live?
So in terms of an actual live failover, so our expectation is that the customer would, cause that to happen, right? Would actually cause the event to power off the system, because we don't go in and then power off something because we may not necessarily know if we're ready to do that, right? Again, this is...
I want you to do that.
All right, okay, good to know.
When I push the big red button, I'm under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress.
Fair enough. No, that's
Give me
a
that
great
easy button as you've done for the other pieces.
great feature request. Yep.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so just quickly on a couple other things. This is where we do all of our managing. Again, keeping it very easy. So we do have other different views where we allow you to dig in much deeper into the different VMs, not just the ones that we're managing, but all the eligible VMs in your environment. You can go to any of these VMs. You can select them and get more detail about those VMs and so forth. Our failover plan, so if you're looking at what the IP address range is that you gave us in the beginning, we put that over in the failover plan itself. And one additional thing to look at is we have much more detail of all the jobs, we call them jobs, that are going on in our environment between inventory, failover, protection groups, and all the different protections underneath. You're able to get that information in here. Yeah, and you can go into much more detail. We don't have any jobs that are actually running, so it just happens that we're in a window when no jobs are running within my environment. If you would actually see the steps going through from this info here. So we put this, kind of hide it a little bit because it's for the IT experts to go in and see what's going on in case they need to. Notifications, we do support SMTP notifications and email for any alerts, anything that happen in our environment, infrastructure, credentials, time zones, and different things like that.